Okay, good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. Is someone sure?
Oh, Mr.
Oh. Oh.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Let us continue our class. Welcome to grade 11 biology. So today we'll be introduced about the grade 11 biology. So as you see here, the grade 11 biology have its own contents, but this time we start our topic from unit 1. So in the unit 1, actually normally grade 11 biology have around 5 units, but we are just already continuing our Zoom on unit 1. So the other thing will be discussed in the class whenever the regular class is open. But in this Zoom class, we're going to talk about the science of biology. So when we come to this science of biology, most of the topics here are they are part of or continuations of grade 9 biology course, because directly or indirectly you have learned much of the topics of these grades in grade 9, and some others might be discussed somehow on grade 10. And the discussion here in the grade 11 is it has much depth, and the scope of the course will be much deeper than that of the grade 10 biology, the grade 9 biology, sorry. So as you see here, we start our topic from what is the science of biology. So as you are familiar with this biology, so this biology is derived from two Greek words, mind you. So that means bios, and here you have logos. So when we say bios, that means life, we said, and logos means study. So when we say biology is the science of life and living organisms, it says. So this is already obvious, and you have learned about these issues even starting from lower grades, and then you continue up to now. So when you say these living beings or living things, we have so many type of living things in this world. Generally, we can broadly we can classify them into two, as plant and animals. But as you learn in grade 9 biology, they are classified into 5 kingdoms, so that those all things are part of this life actually, or living things. So biology is the science that deals about these all living things. But when you come to this biology, that is just already a broad term. As we say, science, especially natural science, have its own broad divisions like chemistry, like physics and biology. So this biology, again, is a broad term. So a number of biologists, generally, they study biology. So some biologists will have special courses to attend, and they will just deal on that special phenomena. So let us have some common biology. Still, this is a part of grade 9 biology again, but let us have some refreshments. So some biologist becomes astrobiologist, he says. Today's will be introduced about astrobiology. And this
ያወጡት በ27 ዓመት በሰሩ ሴራ ነው። ኢትዮጵያን ኦልሬዲ ገለዋል።
ሰዎች አላችሁ።
እግዚአብሔር ይመስገን የትግላችን ውጤት የሆነው በዚህ በትግላችን በመጣው ለውጥ
ስዊች ድምፁን አጥፎ ድምፅ የምታሰሙ ሰዎች አላችሁ። ድምፅ እንዳል ሚውት አድርጉ። አፓራታችሁን ሚውት አድርጉ። የሚረብሽ ድምፅ አለ። ሌላ ነገር ፊልም ምናምን እያያችሁ ያላችሁ ሰዎች ካላችሁ ከዙም ላይ እየረበሸን ስለሆነ አፓራታችሁ ላይ ሚውት አድርጉት። So let us continue. As I said, some biologists becomes, they are known as astrobiologists, and these biologists are engaged in all kind of research, try to find evidence of life. You see, most of these biologists, they just worry about, they are looking for evidence of life. Evidence of life where? On other planet, other than the Earth, you see. In our solar system, there are a number of planets that we are just expecting that life might be there. So those evidences might be searched by this kind of biologists. They are biologists, but we call them astrobiology, astrology. So you see, astrophysics and something like that. Just like that, we do have also astrobiologists, and these biologists are looking for evidence of life on other planets, in our solar system, in our galaxies, maybe in the universe, whatever, you see. So those biologists, we call them, astrobiologists. And other biologists, they take part in biomedical research. You can think of this thing, biomedical research. So these biologists helps in any areas. they are just including the development of new drugs, maybe. You know, biology, normally we can put it into two broad terms. There is a pure biology, and there is what's known as, you know, applied biology. So if you think about, you know, pure biology, this one deals about, you know, the normal, the theoretical part. You see, we were just thinking about, or we're dealing about the theoretical part, maybe physiology, maybe anatomy, maybe microbiology, and something like that. So in plant physiology, plant anatomy, and ecology, conservation, and those biologies are known as, you know, theoretical biology, or that's a pure biology. But when you come to the applied biology, there will be applications of biology in other fields. You can think of, you know, applications of biology. Remember your biotechnology course. We can apply the knowledge of biology in medicine. You see, we can apply the knowledge of biology in industry. We can apply the knowledge of biology in agriculture, and still other you know, fields. So this kind of biology are known as applied biology, because they are just already using the knowledge of biology, but they just already converted into practice. So biomedical researchers, they might just engage in looking for, or in searching for what's known as, you know, new drugs and vaccines. You see, whenever new epidemics, as you just know that, you know, currently we do have, you know, an epidemic of, you know, corona. So there are a number of biologists who are just working against, you know, this virus to just develop, you know, effective vaccines. So it's a part of, you know, biomedical researchers to look for, you know, new drugs for a certain disease, which is going to be, you know, happens, you know, currently, or maybe in the future too. And the other thing is, you know, they are looking for, you know, developing vaccines. They also study the ways in which disease develop. You see, they just also study the ways in which disease develop. So one of the big thing in developing drugs is, you know, knowing their pathogenesis, the pathogenesis of the disease, meaning the life cycles of the disease. So if you know the life cycles, then it's easy for you to develop a drug, or it's easy for you know, biomedical researchers, or you know, doctors or health professionals to tackle against, you know, those diseases. But the big thing is to look for, you know, the pathogenesis. How does the life cycles of the disease is, you know, going on, or the disease causing organism is going on. So that is the big issue actually. So there are scientists, especially biomedical researchers, they look for, you know, developing new drugs and vaccines, but they still look for, you know, how disease develops, to gain a better understanding for them, so that we cures, you know, so that cures can be found. So in order to get cures, first we have to know the life cycles, and once we know the life cycles, so that is easy for us to develop, you know, certain drugs, vaccines, or just to interfere with that of, you know, the what's known as, you know, the life cycles of the disease, so that we can interrupt the pathogenesis. So other still becomes, you know, microbiologists, you know, microbiologists actually. These are, you know, biologists which just study how microorganisms of all kind of functions. You see, we have a number of microorganisms, as you learn in grade 10 when you talk about, you know, biotechnology. So that, you know, these microbiologists are the ones who are dealing with these, you know, microorganisms, so that they just already, you know, develop a knowledge how to handle these microorganisms, and how can we benefit from these microorganisms. And, you know, the organisms will have a positive, you know, biological advantage and negative biological advantage. When you say positive biological advantage, that's just very important for the economy. They might be important in industry, they might be important in drug development, they might be important in agriculture maybe. But when you look for, you know, negative economic importance, they may cause disease to humans or animals or plants, you see. This time this is a negative impact actually, but still there are scientists who are looking for, you know, to tackle against these, you know, pathogenic organisms or disease causing organisms. So this kind of, you know, this part of, you know, the advantage of the microorganism, we call it a negative economic importance, even though it's negative, but it has its own economic advantage again. So this kind of, you know, scientists are known as, you know, microbiologists. And you see, many microbiologists still they are looking for, you know, cures for that of, you know, the HIV, you know, human immunodeficiency virus, so that they are still looking for, you know, to develop effective drugs against this HIV or, you know, disease. No drugs that cures against this disease, but those group of organisms, those group of, you know, scientists are known as, you know, microbiologists. The others are paleobiologists. So when you come to the paleobiologists, these are a fascinating area of study to many people actually. So these paleobiologists, as we just earlier talked about, you know, asterobiologists, those are looking for evidence of life in other planets, we say. And still these paleobiologists, they try to find more about, you know, which ways in which life began on Earth. Those are looking for, the previous are looking for, evidence of life on other planets, and these are looking for, evidence of life, or how does life begins and evolve and reach up to this stage. You see, that will be studied by these paleobiologists, and these are somewhat, related with that of, archaeology, okay, archaeological finds. So the paleobiologists are looking for, life, when life begins on the Earth, and how it's evolved from simple to, complex forms. Currently, we don't have, complex multicellular organisms, but initially, biologists believe that, life began in a simple way. So how does that simple life begins? That's studied by and answered by paleobiologists, maybe. So this group of scientists are known as, paleobiologists. Sorry. And there are also other, different biologists, you see. So you can think of, geneticists. So the geneticists, they are looking for, studying genetics. And there is what's known as a project called Human Genome Project that's completed around 2000, you see, in BC, Gregorian calendars. So they are looking for, these 46 chromosomes, and they are capable of, identifying each and every of the 46 chromosomes, and they develop, the map of these chromosomes, including the content of the genes that's found in each chromosomes. So this is one of the great innovations in the genetics world, maybe. So the others, as I said earlier, biology can be classified into two, as a pure biology and applied biology. So up to now, we have talked about, some of the applications of biology. So you see, these biologists, whenever they are engaged in applied biology, they might have, so many names, maybe. You might say doctors, dentists, veterinaries, surgeons, nurses, physiotherapists, botanists, geologists, physiologists, biochemists, agriculture biologists, and these are also, some of, the names of the biologists actually. This is a part of the applied biology. Some are, the pure biologists, and others are the applied biologists. You know what the doctors are doing? These are just, tackling against this. Dentists, they are just working with that of teeth. Veterinary, these are working with that of animals. Surgeons, these are just working with that of, surgical procedures. You see? Nurses, these are just related with that of human care or patient care. Physiotherapists, these are especially working with that of, sports science and physiology, and then some of, physical exercise and related with that. And botanists, these are dealing with that of, the plants. Zoologists, these are working with that of, animals. Physiologists, these are just working with that of, the functions of the internal body organisms. And biochemists, you see, the biochemists are the one which are just, working the biochemical molecules. They are studying about biochemical molecules in grade 11. In unit 2, we are coming with that of, these biochemical molecules. First, we'll see biological molecules, then we'll see the biochemical molecules, especially the organic one. There is inorganic part, there is organic part. So we are just dealing on much of, the organic molecules. So biochemists are the one which are working with that of, biological molecules. You see, agricultural biologists, these are biologists working in agriculture. And ecologists, these are working with that of, conservations of natural resources. And ethnologists, these are ethnologists. And entomologists, these are working with that of the insects. And genetics, these are the ones which are working with that of, genetics. And oncologists, the oncologists are the one which are working with that of, cancer and something like that. And neurobiologists, they are working with that of, nerves and related issues. And parasitologists, these are working with that of, parasites, mind. So you see, so as an introduction, you can have, some of the branches of biology. As I said earlier, once again, biology can be classified as pure biology and applied biology. The pure one is dealing with that of a theoretical part of, or the basic part of the subject. You see, the basic science of the subject. But the application is the one using that basic science, we can apply it to different areas. So those professionals who are working with that of the applications of biology have their own names like this. So these are, professionals which are working under applied biological fields. So having said this, so let's come to the other part, which is known as science. So when you come to science, so we'll start first from what is science. So as you see here, science comes from a Latin word known as, scientia. Scientia. So what does mean scientia means? Science means knowledge. So when you define science, science is nothing but a means to acquire a certain knowledge. Because earlier I told you that the word science comes from Latin, I said, and that means, scientia. And this science means knowledge, we say. So when we say science, or if we say what is science, science is nothing but a means to acquire what? Knowledge. But that knowledge is acquired based on, scientific method. So there is a system, or science is simply, it's a unique system of acquiring knowledge, which you can say, or simply a means to acquire knowledge. But that means it has its own method, or that means have its own ways, that means have its own procedure. So that procedure, that means that ways, we call it a scientific method, you see? So now onwards, when you think about science, science is nothing but simply what? It's a means to acquire knowledge, or it's a unique system of acquiring knowledge that is based on scientific method. And the science sometimes, what we can say that experimental science. Now let's talk like this. Science, as I said earlier in biology, now science also can be classified into two. We can have, experimental science. We can have what's known as, applied science. You see, experimental science and applied science. So when you come to the experimental science, see, experimental science, this depends on very heavily on what? Experimentation. So as you know, as you can see from the name, we call it experimental science. So this is a science, but that depends or based on experiment, or it try to acquire knowledge based on experimental procedures. So if you are acquiring knowledge using experimental procedure, the kind of science we call it experimental science. And still we do have other branch of science, that's known as, applied science. So when you come to this applied science, these are, a means to acquire knowledge again, but that knowledge is acquired based on what? A scientific research, you see? So there are scientists who try to acquire new knowledge using scientific research. So if they try to acquire new knowledge using a scientific research, by doing scientific research, you see, they try to acquire or obtain or, announce new knowledge. So if they are this kind of science, or if they are following this procedure or this kind of system, those science, we call it applied science. But others, as I said, if they are doing, their procedures based on, or if they are trying to obtain knowledge based on, experimental procedures, which is done in the laboratory, and if they try to obtain knowledge there, or, new information there, that is known as, experimental science. So you see, now science can be classified into two, as experimental science and applied science. So when you come to these, scientific methods, you see, what does mean scientific method means? That is, the process by which scientists approach their work. So this is just a means, as I said, or a ways to approach, their work that will be followed by scientists. If the science want to do something, or if they want to get knowledge, they have to use, scientific procedure, we say, or scientific method, we say. So using this scientific method, they try to acquire certain, knowledge or new information. They try to grasp first, whether it is experimental or whether it is, applied, they try to grasp data. That data will be collected, and finally the data will be organized, and then the data will be interpreted, and finally a certain conclusion will be drawn. So after they draw a conclusions, they will just already get some information. You see, they will get some information, and that may be a new information or a new idea, or it could be a new theory maybe. So if it is proved and if it is true, that will be accepted, and it could be knowledge, and then it could be, published, and it could be disclosed for everybody. But if it is disproved, it's going to be what's known as, discarded. So you see, the scientific method is the process by which science supports the work. And the other thing is experimental science. That's the use of experiment to obtain information set. So that's what's known as experimental science. And applied science is the use of scientific research to meet a certain human needs. You see, there are different human needs, but that needs depending on getting new information. So we're trying to obtain, some kind of, information. And one thing that you have to know about science is, there is no, science is not static, because science is an ongoing effort, or it's an ongoing process. You see, all the time the science are looking for new information. So there is nothing static in science. You know, something which is true today might be disproved, or it might be false tomorrow. That depends according to our level of understanding of science, or according to our level of grasping information. So that is known as an ongoing process. So principles, information and principles which can increase human knowledge and understanding. So as I said here, science is an ongoing effort to find new information and principles we set. And this information and principles will increase human knowledge and understanding. So that when you have a better understanding of something, or when you have better knowledge of something, so that will just make our tomorrow's better. So that's the interest of science. So human need is not limited all the time. So it was just continuing. So that's why scientists are looking for a new thing all the time. So to obtain a new thing, we need to follow rules of science so that we obtain new information, and that will just make our tomorrow's better. So that is the interest of science. So in the research, science collect evidence that supports or disproves a particular suggested explanation. You see, we do have example for this. For example, previously they were just explained by some scholars maybe, and we believe that that's true. But right to this, since our knowledge of science will be grown well or developed well, so that we get more information, and we understood that things are false. So for this, we do have better examples like spontaneous generation. You see, we'll say later. So you see, so all the time the scientists or the researchers, we don't know what kind of research are they following. They may use applied research or they may use experimental research, but they are just looking for evidence, the evidence that support or disprove. They may, if the evidence will be supporting the explanation, or it disproves the explanation, in particular explanation. So finally, we'll just come to a certain end or a certain conclusion. So based on that conclusion, we may accept or we may discard that particular scenario. And one important idea in science is that any suggested explanation of a phenomenon should be capable of being, proved, being capable of being proved wrong, or it can be being proved true. See, one important idea. So if a certain explanation is just already explained and after just already experimented, finally it may be wrong or it may be true. If it is true, it could be accepted, as I said, and it could be published and it could be disclosed for the world. But if it is disproved, it's going to be discarded. Okay, that is the way in science. If there is no way of proving it wrong, how can other people accept this is correct? This is what distinguishes science from religious belief. So you see, the difference between religion and science is, in religion, you have to believe what you are told by someone or maybe a religious leader. You need to believe. There is no way to prove that. But in science, there is a way to prove it. So everybody, whenever you have an explanation, you can just already prove whether that thing is true or not. If it is true, you can accept. If it is false or disprove, you can disprove that one, and you can ignore or you can discard. But that is done by not by a single person, by a number of scholars with certain procedural mechanism. International standard procedures are there. So using that international standard procedures, if a certain knowledge is developed by a certain experimenter, that thing is going to be, comes to disclose towards the world using that procedure, if it is true. And if it is just false, again, it's going to be disproved again. So that has its own standard procedure. We'll see later how that this procedure can be taken place. So let's come to so this process by which biologists and other scientists approach their work for future peoples based on their expansion of. So on ancient belief, that's it. For example, you see, previously I told you that in science there is nothing static. I said some information or some explanation might be correct one time, and it might be false in other times. So for this, we have an example. We said that's known as spontaneous generation. So previously, during 400 BC or 300 BC, during the period of Aristotle and something like that, during the period of ancient Greek scholars, You see, spontaneous generation is one of the popular theory that explain that, you know, living things are coming from inanimate objects. That's a popular theory actually. But you see, that was accepted at that time. It was true. It's accepted by everybody else. You see, and it's just or it stays more than, you know, more than 2,000 or nearly 1,000 years, 2,000 years. Sorry, it's nearly 2,000 years. But later in 18th century or near to 19th century, it was disproved by the known scientist known as Louis Pasteur. And again, later there are other scholars coming on, and they start to develop, you know, a cell theory. Then they just already conclude that, or they just prove that, you know, living things are coming from only pre-existing living thing. You see, a living cell comes from pre-existing cell cells, pre-existing living cell cells. So right to this, living things are coming from pre-existing living thing, not from inanimate object. That's already disproved by these scientists. So today, this theory will be just discussed for the sake of, you know, what's known as a control experiment. We just use, or we just explain this thing for foundation. So when you talk about biology, you just say that, you know, biology dates back around this time times, or this dates back, we can say, because, you know, starting from 3,000 or 300 or 400 BC, you know, there was, you know, scholars who are just thinking about, you know, living things like that, and they say that living things are coming from non-living things. So that was a theory, or that's known as, you know, spontaneous generation. We call it spontaneous generation. That was accepted, and it stayed for around, you know, 200 years, mind you, 2,000 years. Then later, this is going to be disproved by around at the end of 18th century, so that new theories will be innovated, or new theory will be introduced. So that new theory, we call it the cell theory. So there on the cell theory says that living cell is coming from, every living cell comes from pre-existing cells, pre-existing living cell. So that's just, you know, one of the wonderful theory. So that it totally disproves, you know, this spontaneous generation, and new information will be coming. So this times we'll see some of the procedures that has to be followed by, you know, the scientists, be it they are using, you know, experimental science, or be it they are using, you know, applied science. There is a standard research procedure that we call it a scientific method. So we'll see those procedures. I'm just already trying to inform you the highlight of these procedures, so that we'll continue next time the details. But today I'm just, you know, telling you, you know, the highlight. So before that, do you have questions regarding this thing? Anybody who have questions regarding this, you can ask this time. Okay, you guys, if you don't have any questions, let's. If you don't have any questions, let me just already inform you something here. So when we have, you know, what's known as, you know, if you want to undergo scientific research, first we do have, you know, certain, you know, procedures here. So among the procedures, the first thing is you have to start thinking about, you know, questions. So all the times you need to ask first in order to search for certain problems. Then after you search about, you know, certain problems, so you start questions. So to answer your questions, you just want to undergo what's known as first. In order to ask question, you just ask question. So you just already, you know, prepare something for that, you know, answer for that questions. You have to look. You have to just have, you know, a procedure known as observations. You see. So after you have this observation procedure, you see, in the main step, so you want to conduct what's known as a research. So if you want to conduct what's known as, you know, to obtain a new information, there were standard procedures actually, and that standard procedure, as I said earlier, is known as, you know, scientific method. So in that scientific method, the first thing is, you know, if you are interested on to do something, first you need to have what's known as its own observation. So you have to undergo what's known as observation. So when you observe, you might try to get some information. You just get already inputs from your environment. Input might be taken by your sense organs, maybe your eyes, maybe your tongues, maybe your hands, maybe your skins, or you might have indirect information gathering mechanisms. You might use maybe informations. You see, you might just get informations about those. You might gather information from those from your environment using those sense organs, or maybe from indirect mechanisms, or using some kind of materials, supporting materials maybe. Then after you collect that information through your sense organs, you need to organize this information, and finally you just want to, or you just going to draw, or you just want to make questions, or you may ask questions, so that you just convert that information into certain questions. So after you convert it into a certain questions, so when you just already ask questions, you identify the problem. See, in order to identify first, you have to have an information, you have to get an input from your surrounding, so that after you get that information, you process that thing inside your mind, then you convert into question. So when you convert into question, you identify the problem. So that procedure, we call it identifications of the problem. Then after you identify for information, you need to do background research. So you may read literatures maybe. So is there any kind of research before regarding this issue? So if there are, you need to dig for that, and then you look for it, and you read somehow, so that you'll get some information. Then after you just already done background research, then you just want to, or you can capable of constructing your own hypothesis. So when you draw, or when you just already make your own hypothesis, that is known as an education. You are not undergoing the actual research, but you have just gathered some information from literatures, so you can call it review literature. You reviewed some literature that's done by other scholars before, so that you'll get some information, you grab some knowledge about that issue. Then based on that, you have to have drawn, or you can draw your own hypothesis. You see, you're not repeating the research of other person, but after you observe that previous done research, then you'll see the gap. So if there are points that's not touched by the previous researchers, you just look for that, and then your interest of doing new research is to fill the gap that's not touched by the previous researcher. Okay, so that you have to have your own hypothesis. So you can set your own hypothesis. That's it. Hypothesis nothing but simply scientific guess, we can say. So when you just develop your hypothesis, you have some kind of reasoning patterns. There are reasoning patterns actually. You can find when you have the worksheet, you have some questions regarding this issue. So those reasoning conditions, we can say inductive reasoning, and that of deductive reasoning. So there is known as inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning. So using this inductive and deductive reasoning, you just want to grasp that information, and you put and organize your data, and finally you just come to a certain hypothesis. Hypothesis is nothing but simply an educated guess, we said. Before you do the actual research, you simply regarding or depending on the information that you had from the review literatures, and the review literatures, you just forward your own hypothesis, so that after you do this, you design and carry out an experiment. So you want to carry out your own research, or you want to undergo what's known as your experiment. So in order to carry out your research, you have to have a design, how to conduct your own research. Or if you want to undergo experiment, you have to have its own design of the experiment. You see, because previously there are two types of ways to obtain knowledge, say experimental or applied. If it is applied, you just simply prepare your own ways or techniques to undergo your own applied research. Or if you want to undergo experiment, so that you just design your own experiment that you're going to conduct it inside the laboratory. So if you are doing an experiment, there are two type of things. There is known as a control experiment, and there is known as the what's known as the control experiment. Actually, you are going to conduct a control experiment. That's an experiment when all the conditions are similar except the variables to be tested. So you have a control experiment, you have the experimental groups. So you have the control groups. In your control experiment, you have two type of things actually inside. if you are doing experimental research, you have a control experiment. So to undergo this control experiment, you have, your own two group of individuals here, or two group of things here. One is the control group, and the other one is the experimental group. So we'll see in detail about, what experimental groups and what, control groups are. If you want to undergo a control experiment, so you have the experimental group, and then that of, the experimental groups. So that the control group is nothing but simply what? It's a group of one experiment that receives no experimental treatment, you see? And the experimental groups are the one which is going to be receive some experimental treatments. So you have a control experiment in order to compare, your experimental evidence. And to have, to compare with that of, the experimental group, you have a control group here and you have experimental group here, so that you design these all things. And then finally, you just start conducting, the experiment. So when you are doing your experiment, you are just, whether you are, doing experiment or whether you are doing, research, you have to know what's known as variables too. Okay, variables. So we have around 3 or 4 types of variables. That might be independent variables, and there will be dependent variables, and there will be controlled variables, and there will be confounding variables. So you see, you just already design your own experiment, or you design your own ways of doing your applied research. So if you do experiment, you have to undergo, a controlled experiment with standard procedures. So if you do your standard experimental procedure, or if you follow, standard experimental procedure, that standard controlled experiment have, experimental group, I said, and control group. That's one of the things. Then after you do that one, you have to know about, variables for both experimental and, applied research. You have to know the type of variables. There is dependent variables, independent variables, controlled variables, and confounding variables. So when you come to the independent variables, that's a variable that is just already changing or manipulated by known as, scientists. Okay. And there is dependent variables. That's the variable that is measured or observed in the experiment. And controlled variable is a factor that's going to be kept constant, not to affect what's known as, the dependent variables. And confounding variables are, these are factors that can't be controlled, but they do have an effect on that of, the experiment. So anyways, we do have, around 4 variables. So we have to have a knowledge about this independent, dependent, controlled, and confounding variables. So after you briefly know this thing, then you have to set up a mechanisms to just already measure those variables and even to control the variables too. Then after you try to do your own experiment, then you grasp data. So when you perform your own experiment, you just get data. So you collect data, or you collect that data. And if you are doing, applied research based on this setup, you try to collect, data. So you need to draw your own data collecting mechanisms, and you might collect, qualitative data. You might collect, quantitative data. You collect these data. After collection, you organize your data. Then after organization, you can interpret your data. See? Then after you interpret, you analyze your data. After you organize, you analyze your data. Finally, based on the analysis, you come to a certain interpretation. Okay, so you interpret the data. We don't know whether this data is coming. It can be coming from the applied research, or it can be from, experimental research. But the data is organized, collected first, then organized, then analyzed, and finally interpreted. After interpretation, you just come to draw your own conclusion. Okay, you may just come to your own conclusion. So you start with observation. You have a summary procedure here, and finally you reach to your own conclusion based on the interpretation of the data. So finally, after you just reach here, based on that conclusion, you have to write down your own recommendation. You write down your recommendation. Then after the recommendation, finally, you just write a report. So report writing is the mechanism that just already communicate with other scholars. You see, after you just already write a report, you submit this thing maybe for your, up-level officials maybe. Then those officials, they will just look for their research, your research, and then they try to, approve it by just checking whether that thing is proved. They try to prove it. If they find it true, if it is true and proved, then you're going to what's known as, you're going to disclose that thing for publications maybe, or using publication, you just already disclose for the society maybe. So that's the general procedure how to conduct a research actually. So we'll have some detailed steps here. We'll see it next time. Now, if you have questions, let me accept that one. Otherwise, it's better to stop here. So any question regarding this, you can raise. Okay, if you don't have any questions, Mr. Amder is sick today, so he's not going to come. So you do have, the English program, the English lecture based on his time. So you need to wait until then. But for now, you don't have a physics lecture. So you just have it on rest, or you can take a rest and then you'll come back after a certain time on time for your English lecture. ኦኬ ጥያቄ ያላችሁ ካላችሁ ጥያቄ ማንሳት ይቻላል እስካሁን በወራን ላይ ጥያቄ ያላችሁ ጥያቄ ማንሳት ይቻላል እሺ ጥያቄ ከሌላችሁ እንግዲህ በዚህ ፕሮግራማችን ያቆምናል ዛሬ በሚቀጥለው ጊዜ ከሚቀጥለው ፕሮግራም ጀምሮ እንቀጥላለን ማለት ነው ዛሬ ሚስተር አብነር ስለማይመጣ እንግሊሽ ፕሮግራም ላይ በሰዓቱ ትገኛላችሁ ለአሁኑ ግን ባዮሎጂ እዚህ ላይ እንጨርሳለን ማለት ነው ታንክ ዩ
ሚስተር
ጥያቄ ካለ ይቻላል ብያለሁ ምናልባት እየጠበቃችሁ ነው ሰዓት ስላለ ያው ፍሪ ስለሆናችሁ ማውራት እንችላለን አይዳ አማር ብሌን ብሩክ ዳኒ ኤድና ኤልቤተል ኤልፋስ ኢማን ኤቨን እንግዲህ እዚህ ጋር ስም ዝርዝራችሁ የሚሆነው ያው ኮድ መጠቀም ልጆች አላችሁ ያው በትምህርት ቤት ህግ መሰረት ኮድ መጠቀም አይቻልም ትክክለኛ ስማችሁን አስገቡ ሌሎች አፓራቶች ስምና ሌሎች አጫጭር አጽሮት አብሪቬሽኖች የሚጠቀሙ ሰዎች ትክክለኛ ስማችሁን አስቀምጡ ለሌላ ጊዜ በትክክለኛ ስማችሁን እዚህ ላይ መጻፍ ያለበት ኤልኤችኤል ኤምኤም የሚል ነገር ይታየኛል እንደዚህ አይነት ነገሮች አይፈቀዱም ስለዚህ ትክክለኛ ስማችሁን አስቀምጡ አቴንዳንስ ይያዛል አቴንዳንስ ለመያዝ እንዲመች በትክክለኛ ስማችሁ ነው አቴንድ ማድረግ ያለባችሁ እሺ እንግዲህ ጥያቄ ከሌለ ፕሮግራማችን እዚህ ላይ ያቆማል ለእንግሊዘኛ ፕሮግራም ተዘጋጃላችሁ ማለት ነው መልካም ቀን